My name is Evelyn Hayes. $2.3 million disappeared from my father's estate overnight, and when the lawyer read the numbers, one person smiled like he'd already won. I grew up thinking money meant security, not war. My father, Robert Hayes, built his life from scratch. A handful of rental properties, a small chain of retail stores, and a retirement portfolio he managed with stubborn pride. He taught us to read contracts, balance books, and respect the grind. When he passed, I expected grief, a sensible probate, and the awkward family dinners that followed loss. I did not expect a disappearance. The lawyer called us into his glass office with the kind of solemnity television loves. There were tissues, soft murmurs, and the heavy weight of estate papers on the table. I had seen my father's files. I knew the accounts. I had, only months earlier, looked over spreadsheets with him and marked numbers in red. The estate should have read north of $3 million. I knew this. We all should have known this. Then the final tally came, and it hit like a fist. The assets were listed at barely over $1 million. A hush fell. My stomach dropped. I looked to my siblings for the same stunned denial I felt, but my brother Michael, who had always been the responsible one, sat unnaturally still. His jaw was tight, his eyes slid to the lawyer and then away, and there was a faint, almost controlled smile at the corner of his mouth that did not belong in that room. "I must have made an error," the lawyer said, flipping through pages he'd already said were verified. He sounded small. My sister Lucy's breath hitched. Questions spilled out of me before I could stop them. "Where's the rest? These statements, these properties, Dad's paid mortgages, taxes, this can't be right." The lawyer's throat clicked. He promised to recheck. He promised transparency. Promises are soft things in the face of numbers. That night, alone in my father's study with the lamp low and the house smelling like old paper and cedar, I pulled the drawer where he kept duplicates of his paperwork. There were the statements I remembered. Account ledgers with figures written in my father's steady hand, deposit slips and deeds. I spread them out like bones on a table. There it was, clear, irrefutable evidence of assets the will hadn't reflected. Some transfers had occurred in the weeks before his death, large withdrawals routed through an intermediary I didn't recognize. The dates were recent. The amounts added up to roughly $2.3 million. My hands shook so badly I almost couldn't hold the paper. Someone had moved money. Someone with access and knowledge, and they had done it quietly, surgically. My mind raced. Michael had been helping Dad with affairs while he was ill. He'd been the one making calls to the lawyer, the one with the sympathetic face at every appointment. The smile I'd seen earlier flashed back like a warning. If this was theft, it was intimate. It was betrayal dressed as care. If it was clever, whoever did it thought their trail was cold. They were wrong. I closed the drawer, tucked copies into my bag, and made a vow that sounded small and lethal all at once. I will find every cent, and I will make sure the people who stole it answer for it. I didn't tell anyone what I had found that night. Secrets, once spoken, roam like loose dogs. I wanted to keep this one leashed until I knew where it would bite. The house that had felt familiar now felt keyed to alarm, every creak suspicious, every knock a possible lie. Michael moved like he owned the rhythm of our grief, stepping forward to help with funeral arrangements and paperwork, while the rest of us still wore yesterday's shock. People trust the eldest. That trust was his cloak. The next morning, I sat at Dad's desk and logged into his account from the old desktop, using the passwords scribbled in his battered notebook. The dashboard opened like a map. Most entries were routine, but the recent activity tab was a different language. Transfers in the weeks before his death, withdrawals routed through a company name I'd never heard, small enough to avoid a headline, but big enough to matter. The amounts were chopped into pieces and slid around like a magician hiding the main coin. I called Priya, an old college friend who had become a forensic accountant. Her voice was practical and cold, in the best way. No pity, just process. I encrypted the files, forwarded statements, and sent her the odd vendor names and account codes. People who think they're invisible leave fingerprints, she said. Give me time and I'll find them. While Priya searched ledgers and traced intermediary accounts, I watched Michael. Scrutiny makes some people crack, others merely rehearse. He took calls on Dad's phone with a smile, joked about storage units that needed clearing, and seemed almost relieved when people deferred to him. He'd been at the bank the day before the funeral, he told me. There were signatures to arrange, last-minute things. His tone sounded practiced, like someone reading a role he'd had time to memorize. Priya texted within 48 hours. The pattern looked professional. Transfers routed through a shell company, then funneled offshore in small increments. Classic layering. The total matched the missing sum almost exactly. She warned me not to confront anyone yet. Spooked people bury trails faster, she wrote. We need to let them keep moving and watch the tracks they leave. So I baited carefully. I asked the lawyer, casually, about an invoice date and watched his eyes. He hesitated longer than a man who's neutral should. I arranged a lunch with Michael's wife and steered conversation toward Dad's business dealings, watching micro-expressions when particular vendor names came up. In a group chat where family members fussed over flowers, I slipped a mention of a bank contact and noted who responded quickly and who deferred. Each tiny response was a thread I could tug. Each evasive glance felt like evidence. The more I watched, the clearer it became that this was not a single greedy impulse, but a planned migration of wealth. Intimate, efficient, and cruel. Dad had trusted hands with his affairs. Those hands had been used to empty his safe little by little. I had begun to collect the crumbs, and I was already hungry for the day I would reveal the whole banquet. The hardest part of chasing betrayal is pretending you don't smell it. I had to wear my grief like camouflage, letting Michael believe I was too broken to see what was right in front of me. But behind that mask, every step he took drew sharper outlines around the truth. Priya's updates became my lifeline. She mapped transfers into neat diagrams, circles and arrows that traced $2.3 million out of Dad's accounts and into something called Harwood Consulting, a ghost company. No employees, no phone number, just a shell. She explained how money launderers disguise theft, break the sum into smaller transactions, move them across borders, then reconsolidate. But this wasn't some stranger's scam. This was my family's bloodline wealth, and someone I loved had driven it straight into a hole. Meanwhile, Michael played the grieving son with too much enthusiasm. He volunteered for every burden: storage cleanouts, property appraisals, paperwork runs. It looked noble on the surface, but the timing was surgical. Every errand was another chance to sweep away traces before anyone else could notice. One evening, while helping at the family house, he left his laptop charging in the living room. I told myself not to, that snooping made me no better than him, but betrayal rewrites the rules. I opened the lid. Password required. I nearly gave up, but then remembered his old fallback, Dad's birthday. The lock screen vanished. The desktop was cleaner than I expected. Too clean. Only one folder stood out, buried 3 levels deep under innocuous names. Inside, spreadsheets, transactions, dates, codes, and one email draft unsent. Instructions for transferring the remainder to a trust in the Cayman Islands. My pulse thundered. I copied the entire folder to a flash drive and slipped the laptop shut just as I heard his footsteps creak on the stairs. Later that night, Priya confirmed it. This is an amateur work. He's building layers. He wants the trail to disappear. She hesitated. If you go straight to the authorities now, he'll claim misunderstanding, maybe even win. You need irrefutable proof of intent. Intent. The word clawed at me. Stealing from strangers is one thing, but siphoning your own father's last legacy while pretending to care for him, that required intent. Cold, deliberate intent. So I decided to feed the fire quietly. I acted supportive, even grateful. I told Michael I admired how much he was handling, that Dad would have been proud. He smiled relieved, believing he had me fooled. But every word I spoke was a mirror, showing me exactly how far I was willing to go. The lawyer grew twitchier by the week. He avoided my calls, ducked questions, and once, when I appeared unannounced, looked like he'd seen a ghost. That told me everything I needed. Michael wasn't acting alone. The inheritance wasn't just stolen. It was orchestrated. A scheme built on blood ties and legal signatures. And I was standing on the fault line, ready to crack it wide open. The moment I realized Michael wasn't working alone, the lawyer's every move took on a darker shape. Attorneys are supposed to be guardians of truth, but this one carried himself like a man who'd already sold his integrity. His office, once sterile and professional, now felt like a crime scene dressed in mahogany and leather. I scheduled an appointment under the pretense of clarifying a few estate details. He greeted me with forced warmth, his handshake clammy, his eyes darting like moths around a flame. I watched his throat tighten as I laid Dad's old account statements on his desk, neat stacks of evidence that contradicted his official filings. "These numbers don't add up," I said quietly. "Over $2 million is unaccounted for. Care to explain?" His lips pursed, then curved into something that might have been sympathy, but his eyes betrayed panic. "Your father made adjustments before his passing. Illness changes priorities." "Adjustments," I leaned forward, "or signatures shoved under a dying man's hand." The mask cracked, only for a breath, but I saw it. His jaw tightened, his pen tapped once, and then he offered the kind of patronizing smile reserved for children. "Grief clouds judgment. I assure you everything was legal." But legal didn't mean honest. I left his office with a polite nod, but my suspicion had sharpened into conviction. On my way out, I snapped photos of his secretary's desk calendar, appointments scribbled in shorthand. Some dates matched the very days the transfers had occurred, and 2 of those entries included Michael's initials. That night, I called Priya again. I whispered, pacing the length of my kitchen. "He's in on it. The lawyer. He's not just negligent, he's complicit." Her voice stayed calm. "That makes sense. He would have had to prepare the paperwork to authorize those transfers. But if he's part of this, we'll need more than financial trails. We'll need something personal. Emails, recordings, anything tying intent directly to both him and Michael." I knew exactly where to start. Michael was hosting a small family dinner that weekend, pretending unity, pretending the money wasn't a ghost in the room. I went, smiling, carrying wine, hugging my siblings, but my bag carried more than a bottle. It carried a voice recorder. Hidden beneath folded napkins, it hummed silently while Michael bragged about shouldering responsibilities and the lawyer's unwavering guidance. The conversation wasn't incriminating yet, but his tone was. Too casual, too practiced. He spoke like a man rehearsing lines, forgetting that the best lies rot under repetition. After dessert, I slipped away to his study under the guise of finding more cutlery. His desk drawer wasn't locked. Inside, I found a folder labeled simply HC, Harwood Consulting, the shell company. I photographed every page, corporate filings, correspondence with the lawyer, even a draft agreement with Michael's signature. My hands trembled, but my resolve hardened. When I left that night, Michael hugged me warmly, unaware I had just pulled a dagger from his own sheath. The lawyer was his shield, but now I held the cracks, and once I pushed, that shield would shatter. The temptation to march into Michael's study the next morning and throw the Harwood Consulting files in his face was almost unbearable. But Priya's voice echoed in my mind. "Don't spook them. Thieves erase trails when they feel the fire." So I waited. I became the shadow of my own family. I smiled at gatherings, asked gentle questions, played the grieving sister. But behind closed doors, I was building a case brick by brick. Every photograph of a document, every calendar entry, every overheard remark was another stone in the wall tightening around Michael and the lawyer. Priya was meticulous. She showed me how the shell company connected to a Cayman trust through 2 dummy corporations. This is organized theft, she said. But if we can link their personal actions, like that dinner recording, to the transactions, the picture becomes undeniable. That gave me an idea. I started baiting Michael with half-truths. Over coffee one afternoon, I mentioned a distant cousin who worked at the bank Dad had favored. He told me some odd things about withdrawals, I said casually. His spoon froze mid-stir, just for a second. Then he smiled too quickly, changed the subject, and began over-explaining why liquidity was important during Dad's illness. That nervous overcorrection was a confession without words. The lawyer was slipperier. He avoided direct meetings now, preferring emails and brief calls. But that avoidance was its own evidence. Men who had nothing to hide didn't vanish like smoke when asked for clarity. I hired a private investigator under Priya's recommendation, someone discreet, someone used to untangling white-collar shadows. Within a week, he reported sightings of Michael and the lawyer meeting twice outside official channels, once in a quiet steakhouse, another time in the lawyer's own home long after office hours. Their alliance was no longer speculation. It was a living, breathing conspiracy. Still, I needed the smoking gun, something irrefutable. That came unexpectedly from Michael himself. Late one evening, he called me. Slurred, agitated, too much whiskey in his voice, he rambled about responsibility, about carrying the weight Dad left behind, and then almost bitterly, he muttered, "Nobody appreciates how clean I kept it. Nobody knows what it took to move all that money without leaving a trace." The recorder in my phone captured every word. My hand shook as I ended the call, but my chest thrummed with triumph. Yet even then, I didn't rush to expose him. Not yet. Because exposure wasn't enough. I wanted collapse. I wanted Michael and the lawyer to not only lose the stolen inheritance, but to lose the illusion of being untouchable. So I tightened the net quietly, preparing the final play. The more patient I was, the harder their fall would be. And I was patient. Very patient.
Patience is a weapon most people underestimate. Michael mistook mine for weakness, for denial. But while he poured himself deeper into the illusion of control, I was threading needles behind the curtain. The recording of his drunken confession was explosive, but Priya insisted it wasn't enough on its own. Drunk words are slippery in court, she warned. We need corroboration, paper and sound, hand in hand. So I went bigger. Through Priya's network, I was introduced to a contact at the Financial Crimes Division, an investigator named Harris. He wasn't the kind of man you could charm. His voice was gravel, his questions razor sharp, but he listened as I laid out the case. The shell companies, the lawyer's appointments, Michael's slurred late-night words. When I finished, there was silence on the line. Then, "You're not chasing shadows. This fits the profile of organized inheritance laundering. We've been watching Harwood Consulting for a while." The confirmation jolted me. Harwood wasn't just Dad's ghost. It was part of something larger. And Michael had walked right into it, dragging the lawyer with him. But Harris was careful. "If you want this to stick, we need them to act again. We need one more lab transaction. Catch them in motion, not just memory." So, I went bigger. Through Priya's network, I was introduced to a contact at the Financial Crimes Division, an investigator named Harris. He wasn't the kind of man you could charm. His voice was gravel, his questions razor sharp. But he listened as I laid out the case, the shell companies, the lawyer's appointments, Michael's slurred late-night words. When I finished, there was silence on the line. Then, "You're not chasing shadows. This fits the profile of organized inheritance laundering. We've been watching Harwood Consulting for a while." The confirmation jolted me. Harwood wasn't just Dad's ghost. It was part of something larger. And Michael had walked right into it, dragging the lawyer with him. But Harris was careful. "If you want this to stick, we need them to act again. We need one more live transaction. Catch them in motion, not just memory." So, I became bait. At the next family gathering, I dropped a subtle line while clearing dishes. "Dad's safe deposit box hasn't been emptied yet, has it?" The words hung like smoke. Michael froze and covered it with a laugh. "Oh, I took care of that weeks ago. Just dusty papers." His tone was casual, but his eyes flickered toward the lawyer who sat in the corner pretending to check his phone. That flicker told me everything. There was still money moving. 2 days later, my private investigator followed Michael to the bank downtown. No appointment on the books, no official estate matter, just Michael slipping in for 45 minutes, leaving with a briefcase and a too relaxed smile. Photos captured every step. I forwarded them to Harris. "We're watching," he replied. But my patience stretched thin. Every day I pretended ignorance. Every hug from Michael felt like poison against my skin. Still, I played the part, smiling, asking small, naive questions, pretending to believe his stories. The lawyer was the weaker link. I caught him outside his office one evening fumbling with his keys. His hands shook when he saw me. "Everything's fine," he stammered before I even asked a question. Guilt had hollowed him out. His fear was its own confession, and I left him rattled, knowing cracks would spread. Behind the scenes, Harris positioned his team. "When they make their next move, we'll be there. Quiet, watching, ready." I walked away from that call with a strange calm. For the first time since Dad's death, I felt the ground shifting under Michael, not me. The trap wasn't just set, it was tightening.
The night it all came crashing down began deceptively calm. Michael had invited me to dinner again, eager to maintain the charade of family unity. He wore confidence like armor, pouring wine with the flourish of a man who believed the world bent to his will. The lawyer sat at the table too, pale and twitchy, like a shadow tethered to Michael's side. I kept my face neutral, my voice light. Inside, my pulse throbbed with the knowledge that Harris and his team were already in position. Tonight wasn't just dinner, it was a trap. Michael raised a toast, to Dad, to family, and to moving forward. I clinked my glass with his, swallowing bile. Moving forward meant siphoning the last of Dad's legacy through Harwood's veins. He thought I was blind, but the authorities were already tracing every keystroke. Halfway through the meal, Michael excused himself, muttering something about checking emails. I followed silently, down the hall. Through the crack of the study door, I saw him hunched over his laptop, fingers flying. On the screen, a wire transfer interface, digits stacking into millions. The lawyer hovered behind him, whispering instructions, his face bathed in the cold glow of betrayal. That's when the house erupted. The front door burst open, heavy boots shaking the floorboards. "Federal agents, step away from the computer." Voices boomed, sharp and commanding. Michael spun in shock, his hand frozen above the keyboard. The lawyer stumbled back, face drained of color. I stepped into the doorway just as the agents swarmed in, their presence like a storm breaking. Harris himself entered last, his gravelly voice cutting through the chaos. "Michael Hayes, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." Michael's mouth opened, then snapped shut. For once, he had no rehearsed speech, no smug smile, just the wide-eyed stare of a man who realized the empire he built was dust. The lawyer broke faster. His knees buckled as agents cuffed him, stammering about being pressured and not knowing the full extent. But Harris shut him down cold. You signed every paper. You knew. I watched silently as they were let out, Michael shooting me one last look, a mixture of fury and disbelief. He hadn't just lost the money. He had lost the game. When the house finally stilled, Harris turned to me. You played this carefully. Without your patience, they might have buried the trail. I nodded, though my throat ached with a cocktail of relief and grief. This wasn't triumph. It was survival. Dad's legacy was scarred. Our family fractured beyond repair. But the theft was no longer a shadow. It was exposed, dismantled, punished. Later that night, I sat alone in the quiet study. Michael's laptop still glowed faintly on the desk, the half-completed transfer frozen mid-screen. I closed it gently, almost ceremonially. The ghost of betrayal lingered, but the weight of silence finally felt clean. The inheritance was gone, but justice remained. And that was enough. The house felt different after the arrests. Quieter, not because the noise had gone, but because the lies had. Silence had weight, but for the first time, it wasn't suffocating. It was honest. Michael and the lawyer were headlines now. Their photos plastered across news articles, their names dragged through the courts. Words like embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy followed them everywhere. The world saw them for what they were, but I had seen it long before. Men who thought family was a vault to be cracked, not a bond to be honored. I sat in Dad's old study often, surrounded by the smell of paper and leather, and tried to reconcile the pieces of what was left. The money was gone, most of it siphoned into accounts that might never be reclaimed. But, strangely, I no longer cared. The inheritance had started as numbers in a ledger, but in the end it became a mirror that revealed who we truly were. Michael's downfall didn't bring me joy, it brought me clarity. For years I had believed him, the charming older brother, the one who seemed to carry Dad's confidence in his stride. I mistook his control for strength, his sharpness for leadership. But betrayal is like rust. It eats slowly, invisibly, until the structure collapses with a single push. He had been corroding long before I noticed. And the lawyer? He was the reminder that greed isn't confined to family bloodlines. Sometimes outsiders slip through the cracks, feeding on weakness. His downfall was necessary, but his role was secondary in my story. It was Michael who cut deepest. Priya remained my anchor. She never once said, "I told you so." Instead, she reminded me that surviving betrayal is its own kind of inheritance. You don't carry his crime, she told me one night. You carry the choice to live past it. I tried to. There were days when anger still crept in, days I wanted to scream at Michael for turning Dad's memory into a bank account. But there were also mornings when the sun hit the study window just right, and I remembered Dad not as a victim of their schemes, but as the man who built everything from nothing. His true legacy was never the millions. It was resilience. The trial stretched on, a slow grind of evidence and arguments. I attended some sessions, watching Michael in his suit, no longer the confident brother, but a defendant fighting shadows. He never looked at me directly, but I felt his gaze. Regret? Hatred? It didn't matter anymore. When the guilty verdict came, I didn't celebrate. I simply exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for months. The inheritance was fractured, but my identity was not. Betrayal had scarred me, yes, but scars are proof of healing. And if Dad taught me anything, it was this. You move forward, even with cracks. As I locked the study for the last time, I whispered into the quiet, "We're free now, Dad. Finally free." And I believed it.